Okay, ready for a deep dive?
Always.
Today's case is, it's intriguing, unsettling.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. David Catlin.
Okay.
From seemingly average to a convicted murderer on
Wow.
death row at San Quentin. But how did he get there? That's what we're going to unpack today.
It is captivating how his story unfolds, like completely normal,
Mm-hmm.
while committing these horrific acts, almost like a double life.
Yeah. And his method, not something you hear about every day.
Right.
Paraquat poisoning.
Yeah.
So tell me, what is that?
Paraquat. It's a powerful herbicide, incredibly toxic to humans.
Okay.
What makes it insidious is that it can mimic other illnesses,
Oh, wow.
so it's difficult to initially detect.
So you can't just pick this up at the local pharmacy?
No. Someone with access to agricultural supplies, they could obtain it.
Okay. So this wasn't spur of the moment.
Right.
This was calculated.
Yeah.
So let's rewind a bit to his early life.
Yeah.
Was there anything that hinted at this dark path?
Well, he was born in 1944, adopted by a family in Bakersfield, California.
Yeah.
And his childhood remains somewhat of a mystery. But we do know he dropped out of high school
Huh.
and had run-ins with the law early on.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. 19, he was arrested for forgery, ended up in a California Youth Authority camp.
Oh, wow.
It's like those early brushes with the law were a sign.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of patterns, his relationships with women, let's just say complicated.
Oh, yeah.
Multiple marriages, some even overlapping. What's the story there?
Well, his first marriage was tumultuous,
Mm-hmm.
filled with violence and drug abuse. But here's where it gets really strange.
Okay.
While still married to his first wife, he enters into a bigamous marriage,
What?
meaning he illegally married someone else while already married.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty blatant disregard for the law.
So 2 wives at the same time,
Yeah.
and then a stint in prison for credit card theft.
Right.
So he was constantly pushing boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Testing the limits.
Yeah.
And after prison, he didn't slow down on the marriage front.
No, not at all.
Okay.
He went on to have 3 more short-lived marriages before meeting Joyce, his fourth wife.
Okay.
You know, it makes you wonder if these relationships were genuine attempts at connection or something more sinister. A means to an end.
That's a chilling thought. Were there any red flags? Anything beyond the already chaotic nature of his love life that hinted at trouble?
It's hard to say for sure. Looking back, there are some unsettling elements.
Okay.
For instance, he seemed to move on very quickly after the end of each marriage,
Oh.
almost as if he wasn't truly grieving. And with Joyce, his fourth wife, things took a tragic turn.
Okay.
1976. She's hospitalized with flu-like symptoms. Initially, she seemed to be recovering, but then her condition worsened and she died. What doctors believe to be pneumonia.
A seemingly natural death.
Yeah,
But knowing what we know now, this must have raised red flags for investigators later on.
absolutely. Yeah. Especially considering what happened next. Within the same month of Joyce's death, he married his fifth wife, Glenna Kay. They moved to Fresno. And he seemed to be getting his life together, landing a management position at a garage.
But beneath the surface, things weren't what they appeared?
No, sadly no.
Because the deaths didn't stop with Joyce.
No,
Right.
sadly no. 1980, his adoptive father dies suddenly.
Okay.
The official cause. Fluid in his lungs attributed to cancer.
Okay.
However, Catlin insisted on immediate cremation, which, while not inherently suspicious, becomes a recurring theme in this case.
Okay, so we have 2 deaths, both involving fluid in the lungs,
Right.
both followed by quick cremations.
Yes.
That's a pretty significant coincidence, wouldn't you say?
It certainly raises questions,
Yeah.
and the pattern continues. 1981, Catlin was forced to resign from his job at the garage,
Oh.
amidst suspicions of auto part theft. He was clearly under financial strain.
Okay.
Then, just a few years later in 1984, tragedy strikes again.
Glenna Kay, his 5th wife.
Yes. Glenna Kay falls ill during a trip to Las Vegas
Oh, no.
and dies shortly after. Once again, fluid in the lungs.
3 deaths.
Yeah.
3 instances of fluid in the lungs.
Right,
At this point, it's starting to feel less like coincidence
right.
and more like something far more sinister is going on.
Exactly. And when you consider that he was receiving substantial life insurance payouts after each of his wives' deaths and was quickly engaged to another woman,
Oh, wow.
the situation becomes even more suspicious.
So he's seemingly profiting from these deaths, quickly moving on to new relationships.
Right.
But was anyone connecting the dots at this point? Did anyone suspect him of foul play?
It's remarkable how often things can be hidden in plain sight. People tend to believe the best in others,
Mm-hmm.
especially those they know.
Of course.
But thankfully, there was one person who wasn't buying it, Catlin's third ex-wife.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. What made her suspicious?
It seems she had been keeping tabs on Catlin. Aware of the string of deaths surrounding him, something just didn't sit right with her.
Okay.
She couldn't shake this feeling that something was amiss.
Hmm.
And thankfully, she acted on her intuition.
She went to the authorities. That's a brave move considering she was dealing with someone who had already shown a disregard for the law. What happened next?
Her decision to speak up proved to be a turning point in the case. Investigators, prompted by her concerns, decided to take a closer look at the circumstances surrounding Joyce's death.
Hmm.
Luckily, they had something to work with. Tissue samples that had been preserved from Joyce's hospital stay.
And this is where forensic science takes center stage.
Precisely. Those tissue samples were analyzed, and the results were shocking.
Oh.
They revealed that Joyce, along with Glenna Kay and Catlin's adoptive father, had all been poisoned with paraquat.
So those seemingly natural deaths, the fluid in their lungs, it was all caused by paraquat poisoning. It's starting to make a lot more sense now. But how did investigators link Catlin to the poison? Was there any direct evidence?
Remember that bottle of paraquat we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Well, investigators discovered one in Catlin's garage, and wouldn't you know it, it had his fingerprints on it.
Wow, the evidence is stacking up. But his story doesn't end there, does it?
No, it doesn't. Just when you think it can't get any more twisted, another death occurs.
Okay.
This time, it's Catlin's own mother who dies suddenly after a visit from him.
And I bet he wanted to cremate her immediately.
You guessed it. He immediately ordered cremation, but thankfully by this point, authorities were already onto him.
Okay.
They intervened and performed an autopsy.
And what did they find?
The autopsy confirmed their suspicions. Catlin's mother had also been poisoned with paraquat. The net was closing in.
So we have 4 deaths now, all linked to Catlin and paraquat poisoning. It's a horrifying realization. But what happened next? How did the legal case unfold?
Well, that's a story for another time. We'll delve into the investigation, the trial, the ultimate consequences of his actions in our next deep dive session.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into the chilling case of Stephen David Catlin. Last time, we left off with investigators uncovering the horrifying truth behind those seemingly natural deaths,
Right.
paraquat poisoning. Now with Catlin as their prime suspect, the focus shifts to building a rock-solid legal case.
It's important to note that even with mounting evidence, securing a conviction in a complex case like this is no easy feat.
Right.
The prosecution had to be meticulous in piecing together the puzzle, proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Catlin was responsible for these deaths.
Right, because it's one thing to suspect someone, but proving it in court of law.
Totally.
That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
So where did investigators focus their efforts? What were the key pieces of evidence they needed to secure a conviction?
Well, they had to establish a clear timeline,
Yeah.
demonstrating that Catlin had the opportunity to poison each victim. They also needed to prove that he had a motive, a reason,
Of course.
for wanting them dead. And of course, they had to link him directly to the paraquat.
Okay, so opportunity, motive, and means. Classic elements of any criminal investigation.
Yeah.
Let's start with opportunity. Did investigators find any evidence that placed Catlin with the victims around the time that they were poisoned?
Witnesses played a crucial role here.
Okay.
People who had seen Catlin with the victims shortly before they fell ill.
Okay.
Testimony from neighbors, friends, anyone who could corroborate his presence. During those critical time frames.
Building that timeline is so important. It's
Yeah.
like creating a web of connections.
Right.
That tightens around the suspect. And what about motive? We touched on this earlier, the life insurance payouts, his quick engagements after each death. Was that enough to establish motive in the eyes of the law?
Financial gain is often a strong motive in murder cases. Investigators meticulously documented his financial situation, showing that he was benefiting financially
Oh,
from each death.
okay.
They presented evidence of insurance policies, bank statements, anything that could demonstrate a clear pattern of financial improvement following these tragedies.
So the motive seems pretty clear.
Yeah?
But what about the means? Connecting Catlin directly to the paraquat. We know they found a bottle with his fingerprints in his garage, but was there any evidence that linked that specific bottle to the poison found in the victims?
This is where forensic science really shines.
Okay.
Investigators worked with toxicologists to analyze the paraquat found in the victims' bodies.
Yeah.
and compare it to the paraquat from the bottle in his garage.
Okay.
If they could prove a match, it would be a damning piece of evidence.
I imagine proving that kind of match requires some serious scientific expertise. It's
Yeah.
not like they could just eyeball it and say, yep, looks the same to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This involves sophisticated chemical analysis, comparing the composition of the paraquat samples to look for specific markers or impurities that could link them to a common source. It's a bit like a fingerprint
Wow.
for chemicals.
That's fascinating. So they had the opportunity, the motive, and if they could prove the match, the means.
Right.
It sounds like a pretty strong case. When did things move from investigation to official charges being filed?
December 1985.
Okay.
A little over a year after his mother's death, he was arrested and charged with her murder, as well as the murder of his fourth wife, Joyce.
It must have been a huge relief for investigators to finally be able to make an arrest, knowing they had potentially stopped this string of deaths. But what about Glenna Kay, his fifth wife? Was he ever charged with her murder?
He was, but not immediately. Remember how we discussed Catlin's penchant for getting married quickly?
Yeah.
Well, shortly after his arrest for the murders of Joyce and his mother, he married his sixth wife. Was still behind bars.
Wait, he got married again while in jail, facing murder charges.
Yes.
That's unbelievable. Did this impact the case against him?
It certainly added another layer of complexity. However, investigators weren't deterred. They continued building their case against him for Glenna Kay's murder, and eventually he was indicted on that charge as well.
So now he's facing 3 murder charges. What was his defense strategy? Did he confess or did he maintain his innocence?
Throughout the investigation and trial, Catlin consistently maintained his innocence. He never admitted to poisoning any of the victims.
Wow.
His defense team focused on challenging the forensic evidence, suggesting that the paraquat could have come from other sources.
Okay.
They argued that it was possible the victims were accidentally exposed to the herbicide, perhaps through contaminated food or water.
That seems like a pretty flimsy defense, considering the pattern of deaths surrounding him and the bottle of paraquat with his fingerprints. Did the jury buy it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
The prosecution did an excellent job presenting a compelling narrative, weaving together the timeline, the motive, and the forensic evidence.
Yeah.
They argued that Catlin had carefully orchestrated these deaths, using paraquat to make them appear natural while he collected life insurance payouts and moved on to new relationships.
It's like a real-life game of chess.
Yeah.
The prosecution trying to anticipate the defense's moves, countering their arguments with solid evidence. What was the verdict?
The jury deliberated and ultimately found Catlin guilty of all 3 murders. He was convicted of Glenna Kay's murder first, in April of 1986, and sentenced to life without parole. Then, in June of 1990, he was found guilty of the murders of Joyce and his mother.
And for those murders?
For those murders, he received the death penalty.
Wow. 3 murder convictions, 1 life sentence, and the death penalty. It's a
Yeah.
heavy sentence, the weight of justice coming down on him. But what was his reaction? Did he show any remorse, any regret for his actions?
That's a question that has intrigued observers of this case for years. Throughout the trial, and even after receiving the death penalty, Catlin remained remarkably stoic. He showed little emotion, no outward signs of remorse or despair. It was as if he had detached himself from the gravity of the situation.
It's almost chilling, that lack of emotion. Did anyone, even his own defense team, have any insight into his psychological state? What could drive someone to commit such acts and then seemingly show no remorse?
That's a question that continues to fascinate and perplex. Unfortunately, Catlin himself has never offered any explanation for his actions. He's never publicly acknowledged any guilt or expressed regret for the pain he caused. Some speculate that he may be a sociopath,
Okay.
lacking the capacity for empathy and remorse. Others believe he may be a master manipulator, carefully concealing his true emotions to avoid taking responsibility.
It's like we're left with more questions than answers.
Yeah.
We understand the how and the what of his crimes, but the why remains a mystery, shrouded in the complexities of the human psyche. But even with those unanswered questions, his conviction brought a sense of justice to the families of his victims, didn't it? Knowing that he wouldn't be able to harm anyone else.
Absolutely. While the pain of their loss will never truly go away, the convictions provided a sense of closure, knowing that Catlin would be held accountable for his actions.
So Catlin is now on death row, awaiting his fate. But the story doesn't end there, does it? There's still so much to unpack. His life on death row, the appeals process, and the enduring impact this case has had on our understanding of serial killers, and the role of forensic science.
You're right. This case is a testament to the tireless work of investigators, the power of forensic science, and the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. And in our next session, we'll delve into those aspects, exploring the aftermath of his convictions and the legacy this case has left behind.
Stay with us as we continue our deep dive into the disturbing yet fascinating case of Stephen David Catlin. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been unpacking this chilling story of Stephen David Catlin, a man who used deceit and poison to weave a web of death around him. He's now on death row, convicted of murdering 3 people, his 4th wife, Joyce, his 5th wife, Glenna Kay, and his adoptive mother, Martha.
It's a sobering reminder that even amidst seemingly ordinary lives, darkness can lurk. But his story isn't just about the crimes. It's about the pursuit of justice and the impact his actions had on those left behind.
You're right. We often focus on the perpetrators in these true crime cases. But the victims and their families deserve our attention.
Definitely.
And empathy. Their lives were irrevocably altered by his actions.
Exactly. Joyce, Glenna Kay, and Martha were not just names in a headline. They were mothers, wives, daughters, friends. Their absence leaves a void that can never truly be filled.
And for their families, the pain must be unimaginable.
Yes.
To lose someone so suddenly, under such horrific circumstances, it's a wound that may never fully heal.
The ripple effect of these crimes is profound. The sense of betrayal,
Yeah.
the loss of trust, the fear and anxiety, that can linger long after the trial is over.
Yeah.
These are all burdens that the families of victims often carry.
It's a heavy reality to confront. And speaking of confronting reality, let's talk about Catlin's current situation. He's on death row at San Quentin. But what does that actually mean? What's life like for someone awaiting execution?
Life on death row is a stark existence. It's a world of isolation, strict routines, and limited contact with the outside world. Imagine spending 23 hours a day
Oh, wow.
confined to a small cell, your movements monitored, your interactions controlled.
It sounds incredibly bleak. Is there any interaction with other inmates? Or is it complete isolation?
There are limited opportunities for interaction with other inmates,
Okay.
typically during recreation time or meals.
Yeah.
However, the level of interaction is tightly regulated.
So no real sense of community or camaraderie, just a shared sentence hanging over them.
Yeah.
What about legal options? We know he's filed appeals. Is that typical in death penalty cases?
Yes, the appeals process is a standard part of death penalty cases in the United States. It's a complex and lengthy process designed to ensure that all legal avenues are exhausted before the sentence is carried out.
And how long can this process take?
It can take years, even decades, for all appeals to be exhausted.
Wow.
Some inmates spend their entire lives on death row, never knowing when or if their execution will be carried out.
It's a strange sort of limbo, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be living under a sentence of death, yet not knowing when that sentence will be carried out. Has Catlin ever expressed any remorse, any acceptance of his fate?
Throughout his time on death row, Catlin has remained consistent with his demeanor during the trial. Detached, unemotional, seemingly unfazed by his surroundings. There have been no public statements of regret, no apologies to the families of his victims.
It's hard to grasp, isn't it, that level of detachment?
Yeah.
But maybe it's a coping mechanism, a way to protect himself from the weight of his actions.
It's possible. We can only speculate about what's going on inside his mind.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to those unanswered questions. Why? What drove him to do this? Was it purely greed? A cold-hearted desire for financial gain? Or was there something deeper, something darker at play?
Those are questions that may never have definitive answers. We can analyze the evidence, study his behavior, but ultimately the true motivations behind his actions remain a mystery.
It's a reminder that the human psyche is a complex and often impenetrable thing. And while we may never fully understand what drove him to commit these horrific acts, his case serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the darkness that can reside, even in the most seemingly ordinary individuals.
It also highlights the crucial role of forensic science in uncovering the truth. Without the meticulous work of investigators and the advancements in forensic technology, his crimes may have gone undetected, and justice would have been denied.
You're absolutely right. And let's not forget the courage of his third ex-wife, who dared to speak up when she suspected something was wrong. Her actions were instrumental in setting the wheels of justice in motion.
This case is a testament to the power of a single voice, to the importance of trusting our instincts, and speaking out against injustice.
It's a message that resonates, far beyond the confines of this specific case. And on that note, we'll conclude our deep dive into the life and crimes of Stephen David Catlin. We've explored the darkness, but we've also seen the light of justice, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring power of truth.
It's been a journey, but a necessary one. By confronting these difficult stories, we gain a deeper understanding of the world around us, the complexities of human nature, and the importance of vigilance and empathy.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating exploration of the human experience and all its triumphs and tragedies. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.